Hi everybody, welcome back to Bentley House. I'm Ara and today we're going to be working back in the captain's quarters. The last video we did, we made these walls on the exterior, and now I'm going to be adding some interior walls that are going to be finished in a very different way. Right now I'm taking some foam board and I'm just fitting it to make sure that it fits within the confines of the wall. I have that sloped back at the very back of the wall, so I just have to make sure the angle of my interior wall matches. I'm going back to my model I created in my planning video to figure out how I want these walls to look. So they're going to be very thin. There's not going to be a ton of surface area on the wall, but they are going to help stabilize my project, so I want to make sure that I do them correctly. To make this first wall, which is going to kind of create our bay area window in the back of the captain's quarters, I am going to trace my windows. The reason I'm doing this is because I want a column that is directly in the center of two of my windows, and so I need to know where my windows are located so that everything lines up. Once I have my windows traced onto my wall, I can go ahead and start making the shape of the wall how I want it to look. So between the most right window and the other three windows is where I want my column to be. The window that is to the right of my triangle that I'm using right now is going to be a window that is above the bed, and then I want a column, and then the other three windows are going to be kind of over the bay window seat. I am working on what we would consider the back of the wall right now, so if you're a little turned around, you'll see how it fits in a little bit. I'm using some of my drafting tools to make sure that I get straight lines. This bottom line here is going to be the top edge of the window seat, and eventually I do think I want it to open, and I will create the top part of the window seat and some cushions, but for now I'm just creating that front wall that is part of this entire interior wall. I also want the top of the wall to hang down just a little bit. It kind of gives it that ship feel where you have to kind of duck down because everything's just got a low ceiling and beams. So this is kind of essentially a beam, that top line. I also want to create some curved angles into the transition from the top beams into the columns. So I'm going to use my circle template to create some curves, and I'm just going to remember which circle I use so that all of my arches are the same diameter and they just end up matching in the end. Every time I add in a new line, I'm just going to erase the lines that I don't need anymore so that I can kind of keep track of where my wall is. This is going to be a very thin column that just butts up against the back wall of this project, and it's not going to be a ton of support, but it is just going to help make sure that my wall stays square and as straight as possible. Now I've marked off the end of the wall, so I did have it a little bit longer than I needed it, so I marked off the end of the wall, and then again a very, very thin column at the end. And I do later replace this with something a little stronger than foam board, but you'll see that in a bit. But I do go ahead and add that little arched detail in the corner there so that everything matches. Once I have everything drawn out exactly how I want it, again I off-camera reference my model to make sure that my original ideas are still showing up in my actual creation. Of course, you can always change things as you go, but I was pretty happy with the original design, so I'm trying to make sure that I match that. I'm going to carefully cut this foam board. It is really important to have a fresh knife because if you have a dull blade, the foam board will rip and pull as you're trying to cut it out. So this is my completed wall, and I'm going to show you how it fits in. As you can see, that column perfectly lines up between those two windows, just how I want it to, because that back section is going to be the captain's built-in bed. There's two more interior walls that I need to create, and this is the shape that they are going to be because I want a pretty open floor plan in the center. And again, these have a very skinny column at the end that I do end up replacing. I'm going to make two of these, and they're going to be exactly the same. Now I'm just going to dry fit everything into my project, so again I can make sure that I like how it is. I had marked originally when I built the exterior walls where these walls were going to be. That's why you can see in the upper right hand corner there's like a blank rectangle without any wood grooves. That's because I knew that the bed was going there. And this is why a planning phase for me is important just for me. I know a lot of people like to kind of just go as they feel, and that's totally fine, but I do enjoy the planning stage. I feel like it keeps me organized as we go along. Now I am going to create a closet door here. I'm going to use a piece that I cut out from my walls. I'm just going to measure how wide it needs to be and how tall it needs to be, cut out that piece, and then I can start creating the door. I do want it to be arched similarly to the windows, and I know that they have a 2-inch radius, so I'm using that same radius. I believe that's the one I used to create the archway for the door, so it matches the windows. And again, I'm using a sharp blade to make sure I can get those curves as best as possible. I also have this second piece that is going to go at the other end of my 2 interior walls to help straighten everything out. When you're working with foam board, it can be a little bit difficult to keep everything straight, and then it starts to warp. So the more supports you can put in, the better. So this piece goes down here to make sure that these 2 walls stay as straight as possible, and it just adds extra support. So this is what it looks like once I get all the walls in. I do have an extra little wall I didn't show you before that goes above where the bed goes. So now I'm going to start the paneling process. This is the first wall that we cut, and this is just plain poster board that I got at the dollar store, and it is what's going to create our panels. I'm just going to lay my wall on top of it and start drawing in where my openings are. And this is so that I can cut out my poster board to fit perfectly on top of my foam board. Using rulers and again drafting tools and a sharp blade is going to be really helpful in this process. Now I'm used to cutting, so I feel like I cut fairly straight lines with my X-Acto freehand, but it would help to use a ruler if you're pretty new in using an X-Acto blade. So here's my cut out piece of poster board, and as you can see it fits perfectly onto my foam board, and that is exactly what I want. However, I'm going to be working on it off of my foam board. I was just checking it. It's not glued on yet. So now I'm going to take my ruler, and this is the process of creating the panels that make the paneled wall for the interior walls. And I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch measurement that goes on the outside of all the panels. And this process is really just envisioning where you think these panels should be. I don't really think there's any hard and fast rule. And so what I'm doing is creating rectangles along the bottom, making sure that there's a 1/4 inch space. Excuse my head there, I'm sorry. It takes a lot of lining up. But you're just creating 1/4 inch spaces in between shapes all around the space that you want to be paneled. And you can look up reference photos if you're doing like an entire wall to get ideas of patterns and shapes that you want to add in. But for this particular wall, there's so much shape already to the wall because it's cut out that I just kind of went with the flow of how I felt like the paneling would be. So I have 4 equally spaced rectangles along the bottom that all have a 1/4 inch around the edge. Now I'm going to be adding another rectangle that is an 1/8 inch smaller inset inside of the rectangle. So there's going to be a smaller rectangle inside my original rectangles, and it's going to be an 1/8 inch measurement smaller on all 4 sides. So now I have these 8 rectangles, and that's going to help me cut it out later. I'm going to do the same thing on the top, except I do have these curves, so I'm going to eyeball these, and because this is the outside rectangle, I am just going to go around it trying to keep it a 1/4 inch from the curve. And then I also did the inside rectangles, and I decided not to curve the inside rectangles, I just left them plain. Here's how I decided to do my shapes for the entire wall, so you can see how they look. All of them have a 1/4 inch around, and then they have an 1/8 inch smaller rectangle or whatever shape you end up with inside. And I'm also going to number them. This is important. As much as I'd like to believe that all of them are exactly the same size, they may not be. And so I'm going to number them so that whenever I reinsert the center rectangle, which you'll see in a second, I want to make sure that I know where they go. Also, that center one that's on the column, it was too small to make a rectangle that was an 1/8 inch smaller on each side, so I just left that without the interior rectangle because that column's just too skinny. Now I'm going to take my X-Acto blade and I'm going to cut out the outside rectangle. So I should have a piece that has that 1/8 inch smaller rectangle still showing on it. It should have a number and then my other shape that I can still see on there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out that smaller rectangle, and so you're going to have a bunch of 1/8 inch skinny little strips of paper. Those you can discard. You don't need those anymore, but you do need the interior shape. It's going to go back inside like this once you glue it onto the foam board. This is what's going to create your paneling. So now I'm going to cut all of these out, and then I'm going to cut off all of those 1/8 inch pieces, and I'm just going to make sure that I keep the pieces that I need so that I can get them back onto the foam board when it's ready to glue on. Now I accidentally didn't film me gluing this piece on, but you just want to make sure you use plenty of glue so that it holds firm to the foam board. If you don't use enough glue, it can pop up once you paint it. So here it is glued on. And then I'm going to take my small pieces. I have them numbered so I know exactly where they need to go. I'm going to again add plenty of glue and then center them within the spaces that they are marked to go in. Here's what it looks like up close, and you can start to see how the panels are being created. I left that place to the left blank because again that's where the bed is going to go. And here's how they all look once they are glued in. It's actually a pretty easy process. I didn't do the back because you won't be able to see it, but the center walls I did need to create a back because you will be able to see both sides of those walls. Don't be fooled by the fast forwardness of this video. This does take time. It's not difficult, but it does take time to make all of these cuts. And if you have an identical wall, you can make one and then kind of use it as a template for the other walls. So that does make it go a little bit faster, but again, all the cutting does take time. But in the end, I think the effect is worth it if that's a look that you're going for. So here are all the pieces individually that I have created, and if I did have any that I didn't work on the back, I still added a layer of poster board to the back because it's foam board. You want to kind of keep each side equal so one side doesn't warp too much. I'm going to be using some dollar store lightweight spackle, and any foam board that's going to be showing, I want to cover it with the spackle. Now the sides are going to have glue, so they're going to be glued onto another wall, so I'm not going to cover those, but any that you're going to see that are going to remain exposed, I do want to cover up because when you paint it, it will look like painted foam board. It will have a foam look and have a bunch of little holes in it, so I just use this spackle to cover that up, and it creates a really nice even place for me to use the paint, and it looks a little bit nicer on the edge of the foam board. I'm going to do this for each and every piece wherever I think the foam board will be exposed. Once that's finished, it's time to paint. The exterior walls, I did a base coat of black, and it made the brown just a little bit darker, but this is the same brown and I'm not doing a base coat of black. I'm just putting the brown straight onto the panel. This is going to give it a slightly lighter look, which is okay because the exterior walls are supposed to be large pieces of timber that were used to create the ship, and they have access to water, so they're going to end up a little bit darker. The interior panels are going to be a little bit more protected and more of a like delicate handcrafted look to them, so it's okay for them to look a little bit different. The process I'm doing here is I am trying to paint both sides of the panel equally. The reason I'm doing this, I'm trying to cut down on the amount of warp that will end up in the foam board wall, and the more even I can keep the coats of anything that has like a liquid in it, so acrylic paint has a little bit of water, the more I can keep that even on both sides, the less warp I will have. So I'm just going to go slow and paint both sides at the same time. I did 2 coats of this brown paint for both sides of my panels. Even if it wasn't a side you were going to see very well, I went ahead and painted it. I do have my line here that I redrew so that I knew how to keep this panel straight. And when it comes to creating stuff out of foam board, straight is kind of a relative word, so I try to keep things as straight as possible, but it's not perfect. I'm using tacky glue on most of the foam board that's going to touch other parts of the ship, and I'm using 1 dot of hot glue in the corner. That hot glue is going to take hold really quickly, and it's going to help keep the foam board panel in place while the rest of the tacky glue takes hold and lets things dry. So I'm also going to add a little support in the back. I will later paint this the same brown color to match, but it's not going to be seen, so it's fine. Now these edge little columns that I had here, I told you I was going to replace those. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this straight off with my X-Acto blade. I'm going to line it up, make sure that I cut straight through. I'm going to make sure that I leave that little arch there. And I have a 3/8 inch dowel, and I already painted it brown. This is going to become my new column. It is going to be stronger, and it's going to give more structural support to the ship. I am using my triangle again to make sure I have a 90-degree angle from the back wall, and I'm going to draw in another one of those lines that's going to tell me where my center walls are going to go. Because they have a big hole in the middle, I'm just marking the line towards the back, and then one where that column that sticks out is going to go. Following the same process here with tacky glue on most of the area that's going to be glued, and then just a tiny dot of hot glue so that things can take hold really quickly. I added in the little half wall that goes above the bed, and now I'm adding in the wall that is eventually going to be the doorway into the closet. And as I go, I'm adding those little tiny supports that you see in the corners. Once the ceiling's on, you will not ever see those again, but they just really help support those walls. Now I'm just going in and again adding that wall line so I can make sure that I keep this wall straight. And I went from right to left as I did this. I want to kind of keep them in order because I don't want to glue down a wall in the center and then realize a wall that goes in between doesn't fit. So I'm just going in order so that I know that everything will kind of line up as best as possible. Once I have that closet wall with the archway in, I can add this little wall that I mentioned earlier. It's going to give stability to these center walls. They're actually not walls anymore, they're really like beams that go across the top part, and this just helps keep them straight, and anything you can add to help support your walls is really going to help your project. I'm going to use my easy cutter to cut my 3/8 inch dowel, and this is a little bit difficult for a tool like this to cut, but I just keep rotating it, cutting into the wood, and eventually it will go through my dowel, and it does a pretty straight job if it's sharp enough. And then I'm going to again use a tiny bit of hot glue to tack it into place, and then I am going to put tacky glue all around. I don't trust hot glue to last throughout the years, but tacky glue does hold really, really well. Here's how the columns are looking, and I'm feeling a lot better about how stable these little tiny columns are going to be to support the entire project. And you can see the tacky glue that I put in the corners there. This piece is going to kind of be my placeholder for the captain's bed. It's going to be covered in fabric, so it really doesn't have to be the best looking thing, but I'm going to add my tacky glue, hot glue mixture and go ahead and get that guy in place, so when I am ready to work on the bed, I know where it is going and it has a place to be built up on. Now I have these little gaps here, and I'm going to go back with my, oh, here's another piece I added in to support this wall, and I have a gap there. So I'm going to go back in with my dollar store spackle, and I'm just going to fill in those gaps as best as possible. I'm using a tiny little spatula to do that, but really the best tool I have is my fingers, because I can really tell if it's smooth or not. And if I happen to get any into the paneling grooves, I just go with a sharp tool and scrape it back out, and it's no problem. Now I'm going to create some baseboards to make a smooth transition between some of my paneled walls and the floor. And this is just a little piece of craft wood, and you could use like a coffee stirrer. This one I believe is like 3/16 by a 1/16 inch, but whatever works with your panel is what you want to use. And so I'm going to show you how this fits in here. I didn't like the transition from that panel to the floor, so I thought a baseboard would look really good in there. So I'm just going to put it in and then measure where I need to cut it off and make a little mark, and then again I'm going to use my easy cutter for this, cut through that piece, and I did cut it at an angle because I wanted it to wrap around the corner. I'm going to add tacky glue to the back side and to the bottom where it's going to touch the floor. This is going to be extra support for that wall to have another piece that's glued to both it and the floor. And then I'm just going to hold it in place, and here you can see the piece that kind of goes around the corner. And I'm just letting my spackle dry before I paint it. You can also add these little pieces to any corners in the upper areas that you feel like there's a little bit of a gap. When you're working with foam board and walls kind of hanging up at the top of a project, it's never going to be perfect. Over here by the closet, I'm not adding anything yet because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the door, so I'm just leaving that. Now I'm going to go in and take a small brush and start painting over anywhere I added the spackle, anywhere that has the supports that are kind of hiding behind all of those angles, even though you really won't see those. In case, like in the future, if I take a picture through one of the windows, I don't want to see those supports shining bright white, so I'm just going to paint anything that's left exposed. And here you can see the final painted walls. Now of course I am going to age these. I'm going to age it with black, and this is going to kind of marry the floor with the walls. Even though they're using the same colors, they're used in a little different way, but it's going to make them more cohesive. I'm adding some black to the baseboard area because that's where a lot of dirt and grime would build up, and I'm also adding some very, very dry brushed black to the panels. This is going to help the panels kind of stand out as well. And I did put quite a bit of black there in the center. You can always go back with the brown on top of it and kind of mute it if you feel like it's too much. After I have black everywhere, I'm going to go back with some white, and I did put too much white there. It's always hard to get started to get a feel for how much you need to put on, but like I said, you can always go back with the brown and cover it up. But you're just going to lightly dust that on, even more lightly than the black. And doing both the black and the white on top of it really gives it a more diverse color on top of the brown. And this is what it ends up looking like once you've aged all of it. It still looks very brown and wood-like, but it definitely looks like it has some age and it has been well loved and used. And I hope you can see how it kind of correlates with the colors in the walls. I also wanted to let you know that I went ahead and built the bottom floor. There are two floors. There's a top floor and a bottom floor. And I followed the same exact process I did for the top floor. It was a little less complicated because there's no windows, but you can always go back and look at that first video if you want to. Except I didn't do the right side of the room because we're going to have a huge display case for all the ships. And then I also painted it very similarly, although the bottom is a little bit darker. So here's the final look that we have after doing the interior walls on the upper part of the captain's quarters. Now I also need to do the top of the little window seat, so that's open, and I also need to do the bed, and then we need a door to go into the closet space. But I really wanted to focus on making these walls really cool, and I really like the final product. You guys will have to let me know what you think. I did do this same process in the Addams Family Mansion. I get questions about it all the time, and so I'm glad I can finally share my process with you in case you want to include it in one of your projects. And yeah, so we have lots to do. I got to add some more interior walls to the bottom floor as well to help with the support, but it's starting to look more like something. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I have a little announcement. All next month is going to be Addams Family October. I'm super excited. I hope you guys are excited. If you're not already, make sure that you subscribe so that you can see all of those videos. Halloween night, I'm going to premiere the graveyard video for the Addams family, and that is what I am most excited about. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!